When you look at how OTAs package ground transfers, economy sedans, luxury SUVs, shuttle vans, it's a brilliant idea at first glance, but then you dive into the legal side and it gets really complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like they offer convenience, but then they step over lines into legal compliance issues.
Exactly. What really stands out is the VAT obligation. In the UK, if an OTA sets a fixed fare for a ride and sets the price itself, they're essentially acting as the provider. This means they have to charge that standard
Yeah, right.
20% VAT. Otherwise, they're leaving themselves open to heavy back tax assessments.
And you can imagine if they don't add VAT because they've pegged themselves as just intermediaries, HMRC quickly sees through that. It's not just paperwork, it's about how economic reality supersedes labels.
Absolutely. It's like if you were putting together a puzzle and left out a key piece, the picture just doesn't add up, legally speaking.
Right? And that leads us directly into the licensing issues. In the UK, any OTA that accepts bookings or sets fares is, by definition, taking on the role of a private hire operator. And that means you need the proper license.
Yeah, if they don't hold a private hire operator license, they're not just bending rules, they're outright breaking them. We've seen that kind of enforcement in the high court cases, like Uber Britannia, haven't we?
Indeed, exactly. Those court cases clearly set the precedent. If you're arranging rides and controlling prices, the law treats you as the principal provider. That means every regulatory box, from licensing to vehicle safety, needs to be ticked off.
And let's not forget vehicle compliance. In the UK, the DVSA monitors that vehicles are up to standard. So, if an OTA pushes unlicensed or uninspected vehicles, they're not just risking fines. They might face a
Yeah, that
shutdown of
regulatory net is
service.
wide. Shifting gears a bit, consumer protection is another huge factor. OTAs have to be transparent about the service they're offering. Imagine a traveler thinking they're booking a fully licensed, safe transfer and then finding out later that the service is dodgy. That's a major consumer trust issue.
Right, it's a double whammy. On one hand, you have the tax and licensing obligations, and on the other, misrepresentation could lead to breaches of consumer protection laws. The consumer protection from unfair trading regulations demand accuracy, whether it's about the VAT inclusion or the actual legitimacy of the transfer service.
Exactly. And that's where some platforms try to mask their role as mere intermediaries when really they're controlling the key aspects of the service, and that's misleading for the consumer.
Definitely. It's like if you advertise a premium hotel but never mention the hidden fees, people feel cheated. Similarly, OTAs need to provide clear terms about who exactly is offering the ride and what is included in the fare.
Totally. Now, I do think there's a nuance here. Some people argue that these platforms are just providing a service aggregator function, but when they set prices and choose drivers, they cross a line. Don't you think that's a bit over the line?
I do, and I have to say that's the critical point. The moment an OTA starts dictating prices and controlling the dispatch, it's not acting as a mere conduit. It's taking on the full responsibility of a transport provider. And that responsibility brings with it the full regulatory burden.
Exactly, I see your point. Yeah, and that burden isn't trivial. It includes everything from registering for VAT properly, maybe even under schemes like TOMS in the EU, to ensuring that the drivers and vehicles meet all local licensing and safety criteria.
Speaking of the EU, the landscape gets even trickier. In Europe, VAT on passenger transport is governed by the EU VAT directive. That means the VAT rules depend on where the transport occurs.
Right, and it can vary wildly from one country to another. Exactly, like a US based OTA selling a Paris airport pickup where the VAT rules of France come into play. The OTA might need to register for VAT just in that country, which adds a whole layer of administrative challenges.
And there's also the matter of ensuring that if they're working as the principal, they have to handle the full tax, not just on a margin, but on the full price if the partner
So the
isn't
buck
taking
stops with
on
the
that
platform.
responsibility.
Exactly, which means that in the EU as well, if an OTA doesn't get it right, there's a risk of massive retroactive tax claims. And trust me, those bills can be huge, plus penalties.
It really forces these platforms to choose their role clearly. Either operate strictly as digital marketplaces where local carriers set prices and handle tax, or fully step up and comply as transport operators.
Right on. Now let's delve into competition and unfair advantage. OTAs that dodge these regulatory boxes can end up underpricing traditional operators, right?
Absolutely. It's like running a race where one player is given a 20% boost from the start. By not charging VAT or absorbing licensing costs, these platforms can offer rides at significantly lower prices, putting licensed operators at a competitive disadvantage.
You know it. And that kind of behavior, aside from being ethically questionable, is legally unsustainable in the long run. Regulators in both the UK and EU are watching closely to level the playing field.
Right, because ultimately the law is about fairness. If an OTA gains an unfair advantage by, well, breaking the rules, it paves the way for lawsuits and regulatory crackdowns, like what happened with Uber in several European countries.
Indeed, that's a big wake up call. And let's be clear here. Even if an OTA argues that its technological innovation should allow some wiggle room, the rules are pretty clear. If you're controlling the key aspects of the service, you're subject to the same laws as traditional providers.
Exactly, there's no magical exemption. One misstep, like misrepresenting the service or dodging licensing, can lead to significant penalties or even criminal charges in cases of blatant non-compliance.
Absolutely. Now, I have to challenge one point you made earlier. Some might say that this regulatory burden stifles innovation in the travel industry. Don't you think there's some merit to that argument?
That's a fair point. But I'd argue that innovation shouldn't come at the expense of legal and consumer safety standards. It's like building a high performance car without proper safety tests. It might be fast, but it could be perilous on the road.
True, true. Fair enough. Consumers expect and deserve not only innovation, but also safety and fairness, whether they're booking a flight or an airport transfer.
Absolutely. And that's the balancing act OTAs have to perform. Innovate while playing by the rules. And as we've seen, both in the UK and EU, legal precedents and regulatory actions are closing any gaps that allow loopholes to persist.
Spot on. It's almost as if regulators are saying, innovate all you want, but don't cheat the system. And it's a message that's echoed through court rulings, tax enforcement, and even consumer protection agencies.
Yes, and in practice, that means whether it's ensuring proper VAT collection, securing the necessary licenses, or making pricing fully transparent, the cost of noncompliance isn't just financial. It can damage reputation and consumer trust deeply.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. To wrap it up then, OTAs in the ground transfer market must decide. Will they operate as a mere digital marketplace, or will they take on all the weight of being a transport provider? Because once they start setting prices and selecting drivers, the law isn't going to take a backseat.
Exactly. And while the regulatory landscape is complex and sometimes daunting, it ultimately protects all parties involved, ensuring fair competition, consumer protection, and a level playing field. It's the price of doing business in a regulated market, and living up to it builds long-term trust.
Yeah, for sure. This conversation really shows that in the world of travel, convenience and compliance have to go hand in hand. When you try to sidestep one, it risks upsetting the balance of the entire system.
And that's the rub. Innovation thrives best when it's built on a foundation of clear, fair, and transparent rules. OTAs need to embrace that reality if they're going to keep revolutionizing travel without falling foul
Couldn't have
of the
said it
law.
better. Well, this dive into the legal labyrinth of OTAs and ground transport has been nothing short of fascinating. It really brings home the point. Whether you're a tech innovator or a traditional operator, the rules ultimately remain the same.
Exactly. It's all about playing by the rules to ensure that innovation doesn't come at the expense of fairness or safety. And that balance is what will drive the travel industry forward responsibly.
Absolutely. Thanks for this deep dive. It's been an enlightening discussion, reminding everyone that while disruptive models can change industries, they must always respect the structures that protect consumers and ensure fair competition.